Welcome everyone, it's class time and today's lesson will be on CSEC Principles of Business, CSEC Geography and CAPE Biology. I am Kayan Gordon and I'll be leading you through today's POB lesson. Let's begin. Now our lesson today is on leadership in business, and I know that we do have some leaders among you, but let's get into the attainment targets for today. By the end of today's lesson, what are the objectives that we must meet? So our first attainment target of today is we must be able to define leader and leadership. Our second objective, we must be able to outline the essential characteristics of a good leader. We must also be able to identify at least 3 leadership styles. And we must be able to discuss the disadvantages and the disadvantages of each leadership style. Now, do you think you are a leader? And do you think you have the characteristics of a good leader? I know that some of you are form captains, you are monitors or monitresses, you're leaders at school or in your community, at church, but do you possess the characteristics of a good leader? Now, in today's lesson, by the end of our lesson, you'll be able to decide, do you have good leadership skills? Do you possess the characteristics of a good leader? Or are you a leader? Let's look first at who is a leader and what is leadership. So we say that a leader is an individual, or it could be a group too, a group of leaders, who influences a group of people towards the achievement of a goal. And in that, leadership is a process by which an individual directs, guides, and influences the behavior and work of others towards the accomplishment of the goals within a given situation. So, a leader is an individual who possesses that ability to really motivate and influence others' behavior. So you might feel like, you are a leader, especially with this description of a leader, if it is that you possess that ability to really motivate the actions of others and influence people. Now, leadership is using the skills that you possess to really motivate others to carry out certain tasks or to work collectively towards achieving certain goals. Now, in order for us to be a good leader, we need to possess certain characteristics. Now, let's take a quick look at those characteristics. Before we do break down the characteristics or enlist the 5 characteristics that we're about to look at today, if I should ask you, what are some characteristics of someone you consider to be a good leader? You might say a few things. So let's jot down quickly some of the characteristics that you might point out of a good leader. Now, in a classroom setting, you might say to me, well, miss, I think a leader is someone who will motivate others. Or influence. You might say, well, miss, someone who is a good leader possesses the ability to really be balanced or unbiased. They may be able to make good decisions. And there are others that you might say to me, based on who you like to really be a leader to you, or the skills that you possess, or based on your interactions overall with leaders, you might be able to point out some good things that you want to see in a leader. So let us look at some characteristics now of a good leader. Now, these are 5 characteristics of a leader, but this list is not complete. We can add at least 5 more or 10 more, but our focus today will be on these 5 characteristics of a good leader. The first one is honesty. A leader must be honest. The second one is flexible or flexibility. The third is focused. A good leader is good at decision making, and a good leader is considered to be trustworthy. And as I said before, there are others. Some of you might say, well, Miss, I think that a good leader must have some level of charisma, must be approachable, among others. But we're going to break down these 5 characteristics of a good leader, starting off with honesty. Before we jump into honesty, here we have a past paper question, a CSEC past paper question, and just a little diagnostic a question to find out how much do you know about leadership and leadership qualities or characteristics. So let's take a look at this question and see if you can get this one correct. Which of the following demonstrates the characteristics of a good leader? So we have 3 options, and it could be 1 or 2 of these listed options here, or it could be all 3 of them. Let's look at them first. So good leaders inspire workers? Do they delegate responsibilities? Can we say that they make intelligent decisions? Well, let's look at the answers that are provided. So it's either A, 1 and 2 only, B, 1 and 3 only, C, 2 and 3 only, or D, 1, 2, and 3. So it's all of them. And if you guessed D, you are correct. So these are some good qualities that a good leader possesses. Let's look at honesty, our first characteristic that we have listed before. Now, a good leader is honest and truthful and committed to the task at hand. For the team to really depend on the leader, they must be able to count on the honesty of the person who is leading their team. And a good leader or good leaders are honest with others and with themselves, and they align what they do and preach with their core values. So in order to really maintain honesty, a good leader must remember what are the core values, what are the goals, what are the objectives that really guide the process that is being worked on by the team. We say a good leader is honest, and honest and consistent leaders nurture honesty and integrity in their teams. So an honest leader rubs off on the team and inspire honesty in the team as well. So this is one key characteristic that a team may look onto the leader to really see being evident. Let's now look at the second leadership characteristic, which is flexibility. A leader must be flexible, because in leading, a leader is really dealing with people with different personalities, people who come from different backgrounds, people with different ethnicity, sexual orientation, people with different religious and political beliefs. And a leader must be flexible to really be able to lead effectively. Let us examine the concept of flexibility. So, flexible leaders are those who can modify their style and or approach to leadership in response to uncertain or unpredictable circumstances. So the leader's flexibility not only means that a leader must be able to really deal with different personalities and differences in the workplace, but in people's ability or differences in their things that make us different in the workplace. But also when things that arise, like unforeseen circumstances may pop up, a good leader must be able to be flexible to really adapt to a situation and help to really solve problems easily. So leaders must be able to adapt when interacting with people who are different. We said that just now, in beliefs and cultures and customs and fields and temperament. Let's look at the third characteristic of a good leader. So we say a leader must be focused. You know that if you want someone to really lead you, or you want to really appoint someone in your group, in your team, in your class as a leader, you don't want someone who is not focused. We want someone who is focused. And what does this mean? It means that the leader must be able to concentrate on the task at hand. And even if the team kind of strays away from the goals and objectives, the leader must be able to steer the direction of the team back on track. So in order to direct attention, a good leader must concentrate on the goals at hand and filter out distractions, and must transcend from the leader, and this must transcend from the leader to those who are being led. So a focused leader may also rub that off again on the team that he or she is leading. And being focused is not just being focused on the task at hand, but focus also looks at, there are basically three tiers of being focused. Being focused on the leader's internal concepts, or the leader's internal beliefs, or the leader's internal motivation. The leader is also focused on the external environment that may influence changes of action within a team. And the leader also focuses on the team itself. So there must be a channel or a focus of the leader on the tasks that the team sets out to really accomplish. Let's look at the next characteristic. So the next characteristic is trustworthiness. And this sort of comes hand in hand with honesty. People must be able to rely on you and trust you in the carrying out of your task as a leader. So we say that a trustworthy leader is one that can be relied on to be honest and truthful, and they must build confidence among the people that they lead. So when a leader is trustworthy, people can really count on them to honor their word, to carry out the task at hand, and not just that, but a trustworthy leader may also ensure that there is integrity in leadership. And we say we have a little definition of integrity. What do we do when no one is looking? So in leadership, we know that a trustworthy leader also inspires others within the team to be trustworthy. And trustworthiness and reliance these are two things that really go hand in hand in leadership, in the leadership characteristic of being trustworthy. Now, the final characteristic that we'll be looking at today is decision making. A good leader must be able to make decisions. A good leader must be able to, using any leadership style, make good decisions, or the best decisions that are really aimed towards achieving the goals of the organization or the goals of the team. Now, we pause for a break, but stay with us. This lesson continues when we return. Welcome back. Let's pick up where we left off. So before the break, we were talking a little bit about leadership in management. We were discussing the concept of leader and leadership. We then looked at some characteristics that a good leader possesses. Now, we said that among those characteristics, we have a leader must be good at decision making. A good leader is trustworthy, honest, flexible, among other characteristics that we might not have mentioned. So let's discuss good decision making. One essential quality of a good leader is that they must be good at decision making. A team must be able to rely on the leader to either guide a decision making process or be decisive, to come to conclusions, to make decisions on their behalf. So great leaders understand how to balance emotion and reason, and they make decisions that positively impact themselves, their team or employees, their customers, their stakeholders, and their organization. So good leaders are decisive and may rely on experts or staff to assist in decision making. So we have good leaders who, even if they don't have the expertise in certain areas, they may rely on someone who is trained in an area to really guide a decision-making process. And a good leader is able to really accept that they don't know something and really rely on someone who is an expert in an area to really guide or advise in order for the decision to take place. So it is essential as a leader to possess good decision-making skills. Now, let's take a look at another trivia, and this is from the CSEC past paper questions. So, this is similar to the question we had looked at before. Let's look at it. It says, good leadership is exemplified by which of the following activities? Let's look at the activities and decide among them which of them are considered to be the characteristics of a good leader, or how is good leadership exemplified? So, is it motivating subordinate staff? That's one. Two, providing more goods at a lower cost. Giving direction to the organization. Implementing established plans. So among these four choices, which combination do you think exemplifies a good leader or good leadership? Now, is it 1, 2, and 3 only? Do you think it is 1, 2, and 4? Do you think it is 1, 3, and 4? Or the final answer D? Well, I think I'm giving away the answer there. It says the answer is C. I just gave away the answer. So if you were thinking of C, awesome job. C says it's 1, 3, and 4, because we exempted 2 from the answer. Reason being, good leadership is not necessarily having anything to do with pricing goods. It doesn't always have that real factor in it. So we don't, this is the one that we exempt from it. Item 2, providing more goods at a lower cost. All the others are good characteristics or exemplifies good leadership. So good job if you got that one right, and better luck next time if you got that one incorrect. Let's examine some leadership styles. Now, even though we have numerous leadership styles, today our focus will be just on 3. Let's look at what they are. So we say that there are 3 main leadership styles we'll be examining. The first one is an autocratic leader. The second one is democratic, and the third we'll be examining is a laissez-faire leader. You might have an idea based on these terms, if you're exposed to these terms already, what these leadership styles may entail. Autocracy, and we have some pictures that are on screen that if you're watching, you will see that, you know, it somewhat exemplifies what those leadership styles may entail. So we have autocratic leadership, and if you think about it, autocratic, you might have some clue as to what that might be insinuating or what that might be about. We have a democratic leader. And even in listening to the political conversations over time, you might have a pretty good idea what democracy is, or a democratic leader or leadership style entails. And then we have laissez-faire. This one might be somewhat new to you. You might not have any light bulbs above your head thinking of what it might be about, but we're going to break down each of them. We're going to be looking at what they are, as well as what are some advantages and disadvantages of each leadership style. Let's jump into it. So the first leadership style that we're going to be examining is the autocratic leadership style. Some persons may prefer this style, but a lot of people do not really like this style of leadership. But let's examine what it is all about. And it's not always bad. So an autocratic leadership style is an authoritarian style of leadership wherein one person controls all the decision making and takes very little input from other group members. Although this style is often considered to be the worst form of leadership, there are some pluses to this leadership style, and there are some situations or some type of structure, some structure of some organizations that really is best led with this leadership style. Now, an authoritarian style of leadership means that one person is in control, one person takes complete responsibility for decision making and doesn't rely on others to really contribute to the decision making process. That leader is decisive and takes action based on their intuition, based on their inspiration, and doesn't necessarily count on the team to really give an input in the decision making process. So by that, you might realize that there's some negative aspect to the authoritarian or the autocratic leadership style. Let's look at some advantages first, and then we'll delve into the disadvantages. So what can be the pluses of this leadership style, since it is considered to be not the best? So we say that this autocratic leadership style, it leads to quick decision making. And that is true, because in a case where a leader isn't necessarily relying on the input of others, they can quickly jump to a decision. They can quickly make decisions that, especially in a fast-paced working environment, or if the team is working on a project and they need quick decision making, this leadership style is, this is a plus of this leadership style. It will be able to respond to situations promptly compared to other leadership styles, and that's because of its quick decision-making ability or nature. It provides fast crisis management because of its quick decision-making nature, or its individuality in deciding, making decisions. It may continue to increase or contribute to the increase of productivity levels. Sometimes in autocratic leadership teams, you realize that people are motivated to complete tasks because they are held accountable and within an autocracy. So it's not all negative. It is really useful in some situations. But let's look at some of the disadvantages, the flip side of this coin. Oh, and we have another advantage. I think it is related to the others that were above. Let's look at the disadvantages now. Now, the key reason why people don't necessarily like this leadership style is because sometimes it can really contribute to a stiff kind of working environment. It leads to a fearful experience for the team members. You know, people might develop anxiety sometimes due to the autocratic leadership styles. It depends on your team members. So an autocratic leader may often micromanage. They might be micromanagers, and a lot of people don't like to be micromanaged. You feel as if there's a whip over your back every time you are to really complete a task, or it seems as if every task that you're to complete, you're not necessarily entrusted to really rely on your creativity. And that can be bothersome sometimes to your team members. So an autocratic leader micromanages. It may create an unwelcoming culture within the organization. And within an organization or a team, you want people to want to be a part of the team. You want them to want to show up for work, want to participate, and willingly participate within tasks within your team or organization. But an autocratic leadership style may really make people feel like they want to stay away. They can't really deal with the job environment on a particular day. They might not necessarily be motivated to give it their best shot sometimes. So that is why we say that one disadvantage is that it may contribute to a joyless, fearful experience for the team members. Now, it is usually based on a lack of trust in staff. Sometimes we might have a lack of trust in staff where the leader might not necessarily think that they can really rely on staff to carry out the duties properly, and that's how the micromanagement comes in, where there is basically an over-supervision of tasks that are to be done. It increases the work burden for the leader. That's one big disadvantage of the autocratic leadership style. The leader is really bearing a whole lot of responsibility due to this leadership style of being an authoritarian, being autocratic, and the team members may get the feeling as if they're really ensuring that they're trying to meet exactly the requirements that have been set out. So it might really put somewhat of a burden on the leader. It often causes poor communication as well. That's one thing that we can really examine a little closer. Being that that leadership style is authoritarian, you may find that people may be fearful, and that might not really contribute to people transferring information to the leader in a timely manner. People may be afraid to really give their input within an autocratic structure because of the fear of how the leader will respond, because of the fear of not necessarily want to be shamed or turned down, or they might not want to be seen as if they're contributing something negative that is not necessarily accepted by the leader. So let's look at another trivia question. And this question is based on this area that we just covered, the authoritarian leadership style. So which of the following statements best describes an authoritarian leader? Is it A, they are willing to take suggestions? Is it B, allowing workers to plan their own work? Is it C, making decisions without consultation? Or is it D, consulting those likely to be affected by the decision? And I know you know the answer because we've just broken down the authoritarian leadership style. And I know you're saying C, and you're correct. So decision making is really made without consulting the team. So this is the answer. And if you guess that one, awesome job. Let's now look at the democratic leadership style. So within a democracy, we rely on the people who are affected by decision making to be a part of the decision making process. So a democratic leader is one who invites participation from others and really values the input of the team, those who are being affected by the decision making. So they are encouraged to really contribute to the process. So we say that this leader, under their leadership, everyone is encouraged to participate, and leading to increased feeling of involvement, recognition and satisfaction. So based on what we've just described under the authoritarian leadership style or the autocratic leadership style, you might realize that this one is more accepted within teams or within the workplace. So a democratic leader really counts on the input of others. And that can be a good thing, because whenever we allow others who are affected by the decisions that we make to really contribute to the decision-making process, we have a better team, a more cohesive team. Let's look at some advantages of this leadership style. So we say that it improves job satisfaction among team, And that is expected. If people are a part of the decision-making process, they give their input based on what they would like to see happening in the workplace, what changes they would recommend, what are some choices that they believe that the team can make, and the leader really collects all that information and make the decision based on the input of the team. And that really encourages people to even want to show up for the project, want to show up to work, because they feel as if they are a part of the process, and it's not as discouraging sometimes as the authoritarian leadership style. It allows room for more efficient problem solving. And you know why that is? Because we have input from other persons. There's not one person just sitting down making the decisions. When you get input from others, another person in your team might actually find a more efficient way to work out a problem. Instead of just the leader really sitting down like an authoritarian and really making the decision, if the information is really communicated and the problem is communicated among the team, there's at least some problem solving, some working out of the problem among the team members, and a more efficient decision can really be taken. It builds and strengthens team relationship. When people are able to work together, and especially when the team members feel as if their input is valued, they are really more cohesive. They are able to really be motivated to work together. It encourages creativity. When you allow people to really contribute to a team and you count on their input, it allows each person to really give off their creativity to the process. So that's one plus about the democratic leadership. It causes higher levels of commitment from the team. People wake up and really want to go to work. People are really encouraged. The team is really encouraged to work at the task at hand because they know that their input is valued in this process. But there are so many pluses. Do you think there are any negative things to this leadership style? Are there any demerits or disadvantages to this leadership style? Yes, there are some, and let's examine them. The first one is that it can lead to procrastination and poor respect of time. Some persons just don't function well, and I'm talking about team members, don't function well under a democratic leadership. Some persons who take advantage of a democratic leadership, and they may think it is a weaker style. So it may end up having some persons being procrastinators within this type of leadership structure. Decision making takes longer. Unlike the autocratic leadership style where there's just one person making the decision at the top, the leader making the decision making is quick in that style of leadership. But because of the nature of the democratic leadership style where the leader counts on the input of the team, a decision may take longer to really arrive at because we're really taking the input from others who are contributing to the process. It is not a style of leadership for everybody, especially lazy people. It is not necessarily the best style, especially for people who may want to take advantage of this leadership style. So these are a few disadvantages. Let's now look at the laissez-faire leadership style. Now, as if in the picture that is on our screen, you see the leader relaxing and putting up his feet. Now, the laissez-faire leadership takes a hands-off approach to leadership, and it does not mean a free-for-all. There are guidelines that the team or the staff should follow, but the laissez-faire gives a more free rein to people who are within a team. And that this leadership style is usually practiced within a more creative environment where people are allowed to really allow their creative juices to flow. We'll look at some examples of the type of work environment that has the laissez-faire leadership style. So we say a laissez-faire leadership takes a hands-off approach to leadership and gives the others within the team the freedom to make decisions. While leaders still provide their teams with the resources and the tools that they need to succeed, they remain largely uninvolved in the day-to-day work. So let's look at some situations within this leadership style may be applicable. So this leadership style may be found in a creative work environment, as we mentioned before, for example, in advertising or fashion designing and other artistic expressions, because for the art to really function, there has to be some free rein that's given to the team to allow people to apply their creativity and to be inspired and apply that inspiration to create art. So in those structures, the laissez-faire leadership style is more applicable. Now, can you imagine what disadvantages may exist within this leadership style? Think about it. But we're going to first jump into the pluses of this leadership style. We say that within the laissez-faire leadership, it allows team members to develop their own leadership skills. So in this structure, the team members has to ensure that they take control. They manage their time, they manage the projects that they're assigned, and they have to really become leaders of themselves, managers of their own selves. In that, if it is that we have, like within an establishment, a laissez-faire leadership, a team may be given a project to do. They may be given a time frame within to do the project, but there's no heavy oversight. They're given the tools within which they need to really carry out the project, but there isn't a hovering or a micromanagement. So they're given the free rein to use the tools at their advantage, and it really allows the team members to develop management skills of their own selves or leadership skills. It allows the team to explore new ideas, and that's a good thing about this leadership style, because it's not restrictive in its nature. It allows individual teams to create their own environment, which can be a plus in allowing creativity to really be explored. It generates more individual satisfaction for the work that is being done. Now, you can just imagine some of the disadvantages that may arise due to this leadership style. Let's look at a few of them. So the first disadvantage is that it allows leaders to avoid leadership. Because of the hands-off approach, the leaders really entrust the team to be leaders in their own selves or in their own right. Yes, the leader may be counted on for like signing off or for maybe periodic inputs, but it allows for leadership, or leaders to really avoid the full effect or the full functions of a true leader. It weakens the role of the leader on the team, because each person is given really the opportunity to lead. So it kind of waters down the role of the leader on the team, and it is the leadership style which employees can abuse. A lot of times people abuse this type of leadership style, so it's certainly not for everyone. And it usually doesn't include adequate guidance. Now let's look at our final question for today, and let's wrap up with this question. So Mr. Lloyd, a manager, holds regular staff meetings to listen to the ideas of the employees. Which of these leadership styles does Mr. Lloyd employs? And if you say that he is a democratic leader, you are correct. Now today, we looked at the definition of leader and leadership, the essential characteristics of a good leader, 3 leadership styles, and we discussed the advantages and disadvantages of each leadership style. Well, it was awesome having you today, and let's wrap up for today's Principles of Business class. Remember, if you have any questions, to send them to our Facebook page at Television Jamaica or Instagram at Television_Jamaica. Class time continues with CSEC Geography after the break.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Is done, well, it is collected every 10 years and it is used or it is charted where people are organized by age groups as well as by their sex. So the information is collected about everybody in each household and it is charted by age and by sex. Population distribution is really the spread of people in a given area. And this information is plotted on what is called a dot map. Simply as it is a map of an area with a number of dots. And we'll look at that in a little while. Population density, on the other hand, refers to the number of people who are living in an area per square unit. And that information is mapped or charted on a choropleth map. So notice the difference between the two illustrations. Your dot map is used to show population distribution, how people are spread in a particular geographical area, and your choropleth map is a map with one single color of varied shades or different shades of the same color representing population right across a geographical area, a larger geographical area. Now, in order to find the population density and know what colors to represent that data that you are about to shade in, or when you are creating your map, you must know the formula which applies. There are two things that are very critical for this calculation, which is the total number of people that are living in the area. That's the total population. And it is also important for you to know the size of the area that they are located in. So there's our formula. It is the number of people divided by the land area, and that will give us the population density. Now, when you do your calculation, remember we're dividing, we're using the operation division. When you divide and you get your answer, if you get a point number or a part of a whole number, you're going to round off to the nearest whole number. And we're going to do an example in a little while. So using Jamaica's population, so that figure, 2.967 or 2,967,023 people, and the total land area is 10,830 kilometers squared. To find the population density, we apply the operation of division. We are going to divide the total number of population by the land area in order to get our response. And by the calculation being worked already, you will have 274 persons who are living in a single square unit. So what this is saying, for every square unit right across Jamaica, on average, you'll have 274 persons per square unit. So let us apply that principle in responding to this trivia question. So given the information, the population size, as well as the area of the countries that are listed, we find that the population density for Barbados is missing from our table. Applying the principle, the question asks, Barbados has a population density of approximately. So, of course, you're going to divide the total number of the population by the area of Barbados. So, our options, quick calculation. Our option is it 100 persons per square unit or per square mile? Is it 166 persons per square mile? Is it 1,678 persons per square mile? Or is it 2,788 persons square mile? Quick maths. I give you about 2 seconds to come up with your answer. All right. So if you guess option C, which is 1,678, yes, you are correct. So you can fill that information in your table. Second trivia question quickly. So from the information from the chart, a comparison of the population density of the 4 countries will show that Guyana has a higher density than Jamaica. Guyana's population density is 9, Jamaica's is 630 persons per square mile. Barbados has a lower density than Jamaica. Our calculation would be 1,600, about 78 just now. So we find that that is not correct at all. Barbados has a higher population density than Guyana. Guyana is 9. Then we calculated 1,000 an hour a while ago. Guyana has approximately the same density as Trinidad and Tobago. So which of these would be the correct answer from the information from our table? Remember, you should fill in what we just calculated here. And if your answer is C, correct again. Barbados, of course, has the highest population density, and would have gathered that information from our previous calculation. Thank you. Moving on. Now, Jamaica's population as at yesterday, that is the 15th of December, would have been 2,961,167 persons. Of course, with 1 or 2 persons being born or dying, that will change a little bit. So if you check online, you'll find the most accurate number today. This is charted here. And what this is saying, over the years between 1950 to 2020, that figure would have changed gradually. So more persons are being born. We actively have more persons living in Jamaica per square unit or being accounted for in the population than previous data. What this is saying, altogether relative or on a global scale, Jamaica alone will only contribute 0.4% of the total world population. That's not even 1%, just 0.4% of the world's total population. So here we go with a dot map again. Now, of course, our dot map shows the distribution, how the persons are spread out across the island. So let us look at it. You see dots. Each dot has a numerical value, and this is calculated based on the total population in the area. We find that the concentration of dots will tell us how many persons are living in that specific area. So in some places across the island, we find that we have clusters, and in some places we find that the dots are scattered. Where we have clusters, we describe the population in that area as a densely populated area. Where we have scattered dots, or we can see the spaces between the dots, fair enough, we may have a generous population, but where it is far spaced or the spaces are far apart, we say that the population is sparsely populated in that area. Choosing the dot to represent the values can be difficult because if you have very few persons in the population, You don't want in areas where you have a higher concentration of people, only a small dot is used to represent that number. So in that case, you find that you find too many dots representing that number of people. As against if you have too many people in the population, the dot size can actually give the wrong figure in representing areas where you have very few population. Looking at the map, let us explore it together. So we talk about sparse population versus densely populated areas. Is the population evenly distributed across the island? Looking at the map. Is it that the spaces between the dots are the same right across? No. In some areas we have clusters, or we have a densely populated region, and in some places we have the population scattered right across the map. Let us identify those areas where we have high concentration or where we would have a dense population. Some of you are living in some of these areas, and if you're familiar with the map of Jamaica, it can be easier for you to read this sort of map. So we have a high concentration in the southern region of St. Andrew, or in the southern region of St. Andrew, or in the Kingston area. We have a large concentration in the Spanish Town area here. We also have a cluster over in St. James, in and around the Montego Bay area. So safe to say that from the map, that the concentration of dots are areas where we have dense population, are areas where we have major towns and cities. Let us now identify those areas where we have very few population. So looking on the northern coast of Trelawney, we find that our dots are scattered. Looking at the interior of the island, just about this area here. Let us also look across to Portland and St. Thomas. In that region, we find that in this area there's little to no dots. What this is saying is that those areas we have very few people that are located or that are found here, and there are reasons contributing to that conclusion. Let us take another look at the map. What is the difference between the distribution of people along the coastal areas versus the interior of the island? And I drew for one such example just now. So very few people are located in the interior, or we have far less people located in the interior of the island than we would have along the coast. And we will look at that in a little while. And these are some of the questions that you should ask when you're analyzing a dot map. Our choropleth map, remember, is a map that shows the different in terms of population density per geographical area. So Jamaica is one geographical area, and we see different colors, which tells us that the density in the different regions or parishes of Jamaica are even, or it differs from place to place. So the depth of the shade will indicate a greater value in the population numbers. What this is saying, the darker shades are representing greater numbers, whereas the lighter shades are indicating fewer people. With that being said, we find far more people concentrated in St. Catherine, Kingston, and St. Andrew relative to the other parishes across the island. Looking at Trelawney, we find that the population density will be far less than those areas that were previously named. Even though this type of map is easy to draw, Identifying the boundaries are important. However, it doesn't give a true representation of the exact number. So the number in terms of, if you're looking at the key on the map, you realize that the numbers that are given in reading or interpreting the map is really indicated in range. Outside of that, it doesn't give you a specific number as per community looking at a map of this nature. If you would want to know the number of people that are living in Summerhill, St. James versus those that are living in Alexandria, St. Anne, you would have to plot that data on a larger scale in order to find that data. This map is used, and it's a great use where we are making comparisons between countries and how the population spread out. Sometimes we have this map being used along with your dot map in order to give a true representation of what the population looks like. This information is also important for government where planning is concerned. So here we go, looking at another population choropleth map of Jamaica. This time our color is possibly of the orange family. What this is saying, with 74 persons per square unit living in Jamaica altogether, when we look at the map and we check the actual figures, what we find is that 55.4% of the total population are living in urban areas. Or urban areas are speaking to the major towns and cities. So of course, each capital is a major town or is an urban area to the entire parish. So we find a lot more persons concentrated or living or located in these regions. And the data that was used to calculate this would be the actual number of people calculated in about June of this year. Of course, today, that figure would have changed. So notice the colors and notice how the shade of the single color differs from place to place. So we have a far lighter shade in Trelawney than it would be in St. Catherine. It's a tad bit darker in Manchester. So in terms of looking at the most populated parishes in Jamaica, it is safe to say Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine will be the most populated. Then we would have St. James based on our map, followed or St. James and Manchester, followed by the others, and we would need the actual figures to actually chart that in a table or rank that information as we would see it on our map. So this is a map that captures both the population density as well as population distribution. So we have our dots representing the distribution, telling us how many persons are living in each area per square unit. The dots are showing you the number of people that are concentrated in the different areas. And remember, the dots will tell us exactly the representation of, not the exact figures, but approximately how many persons are represented by a single dot. The size of the dot also matters, because the larger the dot, it indicates that more persons are living in that area, or concentrated in that area. The smaller the dot, it will also indicate that less persons are in that region. I want you to take note, looking at the map, at the interior of the island, looking at one item of the key, which shows the land area where elevations are over 500 meters above sea level. Of course, we are talking about the mountainous regions, the interior. We have far less persons that are living there, as we concluded earlier. And safe to say that one of the reasons because of the elevation. So the shaded portions are the high-rise or the mountainous region. We find smaller or few dots concentrated in that area. Looking along the coast, the shape and the size of the dots are a bit different. They are usually larger or darker, which indicates that more persons are generally found along this path. To represent the information that was mentioned earlier, where we collect from the census, we chart that information based on the age and the sex of people. And we're talking about the sex of the people, we're not talking about the gender. The sex is merely whether or not the population is male or female. Now, that information is plotted per age group. So we have rankings between 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and that continues to 100 or more in terms of age. On the horizontal axis, we have either the number of people represented out of the population, or we have the percentage of the population. So looking at, and this figure would have been from 1990, and we'll look at the changes in a little while. In 1990, we find that the base of our population pyramid would be wider, simply because we have far more persons of that age group in the island as against persons who are between the ages of 90 and 94. So we can use this information to compare data where the age groups and the sex are concerned. So the total population of the area can be subdivided into age groups by male and female portions. The information is plotted on a horizontal bar graph, which is called a population pyramid. And the population pyramid shows the changes over time. So every year census data is collected, the shape of the population pyramid changes as well. And let us look at that. So this is 1990, where we had 2.4 million people. This is 2000, where we had 2.6 people. We look at the shape of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid now changes a little bit. It looks a bit more slender at the base. This is 2010, where we had about 2.8 million people. Notice the base of the pyramid, it changes. Okay, notice the base of the pyramid, it changes a bit, so it is a bit more slender between where the age group of 0 to 4 is represented. So this population 10 years prior to 2010 would have moved up the population pyramid. So they would be accounted for between the age group 10 to 14. So notice that area is now being reflected based on the size, continuing the trend as per age group. Then we look at 2020. So this information is telling us that the shape changes. So we have far more persons being accounted for where the labor force or a young population, we can say. Jamaica has a young population based on what we are seeing here. Finding that majority of the population lies between about 15 to 19 and 45 to 49 in terms of age group. In 2018, or using the data from 2018, let's do a little analysis of the population pyramid. What it is saying that Jamaica has a youthful population based on what we looked at where 2020 population pyramid was concerned, finding that you have a larger number of people between the ages of 0 and 30 years old. The labor force, who are persons between the ages of 18 and 65 by law, they account for 63% of the total population, and the dependency population, which will be persons between 0 and 18, children, and the older generation, which will be between 65 and above. These persons are 60 and above. These persons are part of the dependencies. They are not able to work. You find that they account for 54% of the population. Safe to say, it is not entirely even, but there's a fair balance between the dependency population versus the labor force or the working population. So this information, or this is a type of information that the pyramid would give. Density, or seeing that the population density or the spread of people in a given area, as well as the distribution of people changes over time. There are a number of factors that are influencing these change. These the changes that we look at can be categorized in 3 different categories: the physical, the cultural, and we also have the socio-economic reasons. So the socio-economic reasons are merely how is it that we live from day to day? How is it that we socialize? What are some of the factors that are affecting how we socialize? The historical factors are based on the influence of our inherited practices of our ancestors and the influences from our ancestors as well. The physical factors, they may change depending on what is happening in our environment, and these would include climate, altitude, rivers, closeness to sea, natural vegetation, and soils. Historical factors would include migration patterns, and the socio-economic reasons would include the resources that are available in the area as well as migration. We look at each briefly, starting with closeness to sea. When we looked at we look at the population distribution map, the dot map, we find that a number of persons are located, or more persons usually locate or are found along the coastal region, simply because there's quite a lot of access, or there's easy access to the resources that are made available there. One, the area is flat, and it affords persons the ability to move around easily. It allows them the opportunity to be engaged in industrial activities. It also is more suitable for construction. There is easy supply or easy access to water, the basic necessities that we will need to survive without any hassle and bustle to find those things. It gives us easy access to transportation. We can move from point A to point B easily, whether or not you have a car. The road surfaces are good, as opposed to areas where the terrain, we have a lot of holes and it takes time to move from one point to another. And we can also speak of other resources. Fishing resources is also important to note, seeing that as an extractive industry, we will need access to the sea. We look at relief, altitude, and climate as another factor. Remember, when we were looking at agriculture, we also discussed the fact that altitude, being the height above sea level, is very important. The height above sea level is determined by the relief of the land, which is the shape of the land, whether it is hilly, whether it is flat, whether it is suitable, there's a gradual change in elevation. It is important. All of this helps to determine the climate. Generally, on high rise, or the higher you go above sea level, the cooler it is as it relates to temperature. The slopes are steep in these areas, or to get from low point to high point, the slopes are steep, and because of that access, it discourages settlement. In Jamaica, there's a bit of contrast, seeing that even though the temperatures are cooler, where farming is concerned, this low temperature facilitates the production of specific agricultural cash crops. Then we look at access to rivers. Rivers, apart from facilitating domestic irrigation and transportation usage, it also influences good soils where alluvial silts are deposits on the banks. So you find that farming communities are located along, or you find a larger population in rural communities along riversides where the soil quality is good, as opposed to poor soils where we have low yields and sparse population. We look at natural vegetation, to note the only undisturbed vegetation or the only vegetation that will distract population settlement in an area is areas where we find rainforests. Simply because if the rainforest is disturbed or the trees are felled, then it will lead to environmental degradation. And of course, we don't want to waste the land. In looking at the comparison and how persons settle, we look at agriculture being a factor. So look at agricultural land and what crops are produced at different points. We find that it accounts for how people spread out across the island. We can also look at how the land is used, what areas are most suitable for population settlement versus those areas that aren't. So we look at the interior because of the elevation and how unsuitable it is for settlement and access. We find far less persons concentrated in those areas as opposed to the coast. We look at access to rivers as another physical example that we just looked at. So along riverways, we find a larger concentration. Looking at the comparison up on our map, we find that more persons are concentrated in areas where we have rivers as opposed to areas where there are no rivers. Historical factors will lead to or will speak to migratory movements and settlement of indigenous groups. So we find that in some communities we have a high concentration of Indians, especially in Westmoreland, or we find persons of maroon villages in certain areas. We look at those settlement patterns as well. We look at natural disasters being a reason for forced migration of indigenous groups as well as our present day group as well. We look at migration more voluntary as a socio-economic reasons where persons would want to move from rural areas to get easy access to all the opportunities that are afforded to them in urban areas. So the opportunities that are here or that are in urban areas are far more and are better and are of greater usage in urban areas than there are in rural towns and communities. Another socioeconomic factor is that of resources. We talk of resources, we talk about the different economic activities that are taking place in the different communities or in the different regions. So persons will settle in areas where we have a lot of economic activity or where they have economic choices or means of living as opposed to areas where they are lacking because they need to exploit these resources as long as they will have the resources that are necessary. For example, along the northern coast of Jamaica, we find a lot more persons that are concentrated there. When we look at Kingston and St. Andrew, a lot more persons are located there. We look at the access to jobs, look at the increase in technology as factors that are contributing to these. These are urban areas, as was mentioned before. So look, after gathering all of that information, we're going to quickly respond to these trivia questions. I want you to carefully observe the map that shows the population density of island P. Using the key, remember, the darker the shade, it represents a higher concentration of people. The first question is asking us which of the statements are true having looked at the map. So it says the population is evenly distributed. Looking at the map, seeing that we don't have one true color right across, we have varied representation based on the key. So it says it is evenly distributed. We can't agree with that. The area has the highest density in the south. We can't really agree with that either. The population density increases outwards from Area 1. Area 1 has the darkest shade. To me, it seems as though it is decreasing. The population density decreases from Area 1, as we just identified. Using the same map, which of the following areas has the smallest population? Again, we're looking at our key to help us to give the correct response. Is it area 1? Is it area 2? Is it area 3? Or is it area 4? Looking at the key to respond, the area that would have the least is indicated, or there's nothing in terms of shade, so it is blank. So it is possibly, answer would be C. Area 3 would have the smallest population being represented. So today we looked at population. In looking at population, we looked at key terms such as population, census, population distribution, and population density. We looked at ways in which this information can be charted. We look at the dot map being used to show population distribution. We looked at the choropleth map, which is used to show population density. And of course, our dot map is illustrated by the different size of the dots on the map, charted on the map. And we look at the one color of different shades being used on our choropleth map. We also look at the population pyramid, which was used to chart population data per sex and age group. We also looked at the factors that are influencing population settlement in an area, population density and distribution in a particular area. And these factors can be divided into 3 groups, namely the physical factors, the socioeconomic factors, and we also looked at the historical factors. That's it for today's lesson. If you have any questions, send them to Television Jamaica's Facebook page at Television Jamaica or Instagram at television_Jamaica, or use the hashtag TVJ class time. Cape Biology is up next.
Welcome back, CAVE students. I'm Joanna George Johnson, and I will be your teacher for this biology lesson. Let's get into it. Well, last week we were looking at respiration, and we will continue to look at respiration today. What happens is that we discovered last week that the respiration is in several parts, and there are different types of respiration. The type of respiration we covered last week is for anaerobic respiration. That is respiration without oxygen. Now, the first part that we looked at was glycolysis, and glycolysis happens with both anaerobic and aerobic respiration. So when we looked at glycolysis last week, it would have been the starting point for aerobic respiration, which is what we will be doing today. Okay? Now, when there's no oxygen around, what will happen at the end of glycolysis, the pyruvate that we made will go towards anaerobic respiration, sometimes called fermentation, either lactate fermentation or alcohol fermentation, depending on the organism. But when there is oxygen present and the cells that is conducting the respiration process contains mitochondria, then it moves into what we call aerobic respiration. So today we'll be looking at the different parts of the aerobic respiration, which is called the link reaction, Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, and then we will talk about some important factors that deals with aerobic respiration as we go into it. So let's begin. So please remember that the link reaction and Krebs cycle occurs only when oxygen is present. And so we are going to start with the link reaction since it happens before. Both of these processes occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. And if you remember clearly from last class, the mitochondria contains three major sections. The innermost section of the mitochondria is where we call the matrix. It contains all of the necessary enzymes, the fluids, the proteins, and so on that is required for the rest of respiration. And so therefore you find the link reaction and Krebs cycle will be going on in that section of the mitochondria. So what is the link reaction? Now, if oxygen is available, the pyruvate that is made at the end of glycolysis will move to the matrix of the mitochondria. Please be reminded that glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. So therefore, there is a movement of the pyruvate into the mitochondria for the further processing of the three carbons or the carbons that are coming from the original glucose molecule. Now, you will see in some books that instead of seeing pyruvate, you'll see pyruvic acid. It's basically the same thing. Those of you who do chemistry would know that when you have an acid, even an organic acid in water, what happens is that there's a hydrogen ion that dissociates from the acid, and the resulting part, you have the anion and the hydrogen ion. That is how it shows up in mixed into water. And because all metabolic reaction takes place in water in a cell, then typically pyruvic acid will actually shows up as pyruvate. Hence why I tend to use that form of the word. However, if you see in your book or books that you are reading, pyruvic acid is basically the same thing. Basically, during this process of the link reaction, pyruvate or pyruvic acid, as the case may be, is going to go from a 3-carbon compound to a 2-carbon group that will be attached to this substance called coenzyme A. So let's talk a little bit more about that. All right? Obviously, if you're going from a 3 to a 2-carbon, clearly there's 1 carbon being lost. And that carbon being lost will come off as CO2. All right? Please bear that in mind. So let's look at it. First thing is that the pyruvate will lose one of its 3 carbons during this process. And one of the a molecule of CO2 or carbon dioxide will be formed. So the process is known as decarboxylation.
Why? Because, well, you're removing a carbon, decarboxylation. All right? Then, on top of that, 2 hydrogens are going to be removed from the pyruvate as well. And this is because you're removing hydrogen. It's called dehydrogenation. But in a strict sense, what happens is that these hydrogens are going to be picked up or captured by the oxidized form of NAD+. And then when it's attached, it is called reduced NAD. Remember from previous classes I said to you that anytime a compound or a molecule gets hydrogen attached to it, it is being reduced. When it loses the hydrogen, it is being oxidized. When it gains hydrogen, it is being reduced. All right? That's just a chemical or chemistry term for the process. Now, the 2 carbon molecule that is now made, called acetyl group, it will combine with a substance called coenzyme A. And it is combining with coenzyme A to make acetyl coenzyme A. Yeah, nothing too fancy. Now, I'm going to show to you where this acetyl coenzyme A is very important to the whole process of not just respiration, but the fact that not only carbohydrates can be used for respiration. Typically, you would have heard that some, people say fats can be used and other substances. Now, here we're going to show you how fats or lipids can be used in the process of respiration. Clearly, fats do not enter glycolysis, but the making of acetyl coenzyme A is important for the next step of respiration, which is called Krebs cycle. And so if we go over here to this whiteboard, I have drawn on the board a diagrammatic view or representation of what's called a triglyceride. Okay, let's hope I spelled it correctly because I'm known for that. Anyway, this part you should remember, these 3 chains, and I drew out one. The others I use the zigzag pattern that you should be familiar with from Unit 1. What happens is that they can be each detached from the central part of the molecule called, as you know, glycerol. Okay, and these 3 things are called the fatty acid chain. Okay, now these come in very important because in a triglyceride, what happens is that it is possible, you remember the acetyl group? If I were to get an enzyme and you cut this fatty acid chain here, you cut it here, you cut it here, and so on, what you have here essentially is acetyl groups being made. And each of these acetyl groups, 2 carbon groups, can be now attached to coenzyme. Coenzyme A, making more acetyl coenzyme A. So just to let you know, the link reaction can occur with pyruvate and usually does, but then if there are times that are needed where your lipids in your body needs to be used for respiration purposes, this is where the lipids or your fats enters respiration, is at this stage. Just for the mere fact that the acetyl groups can be made just from cutting the fatty acid chains into 2 carbon groups. And if you notice, each of these groups can now enter Krebs cycle. And because there are 3 chains for each molecule, it means then, and each chain is quite long, it means that several of these will be made per triglyceride. Whereas in glucose, you only can make clearly only 2 of these per glucose molecule. So that's why you'd hear persons saying that fats provides more energy to the body because it has that ability. But just to let you know, it's not always the case. Okay? Let's move on. So, for each pyruvate molecule, the link reaction will produce the following things. 1 molecule of reduced NAD, and I put beside of it what the potential ATP is going to be. Please remember, the point of respiration is to produce ATP. So if you're not producing ATP, there's no point. So this is the reason here. The reduced NAD is going to later on go on to produce some ATP molecules. Each time you see it from glycolysis coming down, that is the purpose of it. Also, 1 molecule of CO2 will be removed as well. And so you can recall that there are 2 pyruvate per glucose because pyruvate is a 3-carbon compound and glucose was 6, which means it was split into half, so you have 2 3-carbon compounds of pyruvate. So each pyruvate is producing 1 NAD and 1 CO2. It means at the end of it all, the glucose molecule would have been producing 2 NAD or reduced NAD. I have 1. It's supposed to be 2 CO2 molecules and obviously 2 acetyl coenzyme A. And so far, you have broken 2 bonds, 2 carbon-carbon bonds from the original glucose molecule, which is very important because each time the carbon-carbon bond is broken, it means that there's a possibility for energy to be formed. Okay? Because just remember, the bonds were held together because of some energy force between them. Them being broken is going to release the possibility of ATP being formed, which is the energy currency of all cells. All right, so that's the link reaction for you. So after the link reaction, the acetyl coenzyme A goes on to the next stage of respiration. Okay, the next stage of respiration is called the Krebs cycle. It also occurs in the matrix of the, it also occurs in the matrix of the mitochondrion, just like the link reaction. What happens is that the acetyl coenzyme A attaches to a 4-carbon substance called oxaloacetic acid. I wish I was able to write it out here, but I didn't. But just notice that this is a 4-carbon compound here. Remember, the acetyl group is a 2-carbon compound. So when this 2 adds with this 4, it's going to make a 6-carbon compound that is here called citric acid. And some of you might be familiar with this particular acid. This is the same acid you find in your oranges, your limes, your lemons, and grapefruit and things like that. It's the same acid. All right? And it's a 6-carbon acid. But please bear in mind, what I usually do is that I color the 2 of the carbons in the group just so you can remember that these 2 carbons are coming from the original glucose molecule. So as the acetyl group attaches to oxaloacetic acid, what happens is the coenzyme A, which is just like a taxi, it just brings it to the position to be attached to acetyl coenzyme A. After that has been done, coenzyme A goes off to find the next acetyl group. All right? Now, the cycle begins after that. What happens is a series of complex enzyme-controlled reactions obviously will happen. And please note, some of the different levels, you're not needed to know all of the names of the different parts. So it's just make it easier for you just to watch the number of carbons as it goes. So first thing to happen is in the process that there is decarboxylation that is taking place. So 1 carbon is lost as carbon dioxide. So far we have lost 1 carbon dioxide up in the link reaction, and next one here right at the start of the Krebs cycle. And then on top of that, you also are making more reduced NAD. All right? And reduced NAD, all right, as you know, will go on to form ATP later on in the process. Now, so now you move from a 6-carbon compound here to a 5-carbon compound here. From 6 to 5, because you have lost one of the carbons. So one of the carbon that you have lost, we're going to call that's the carbon that originally came from the glucose molecule, and there's only one now left. I'm just marking it as much as I can here. So what happens is, as the process continues, a next carbon dioxide comes off. So here you have a next carbon being lost. I'm just marking it up so you can recognize. So this is the second carbon that we started out with at the start that is now being lost. So you go back to our next 4-carbon compound. Just to let you know, you don't go back to oxaloacetic acid immediately. There's a series of reactions that takes place before it goes back to oxaloacetic acid. The point is that during this process, NAD, reduced NAD is also made again. And then, as it goes from one compound, 4-carbon compound, to a next 4-carbon compound, actual ATP is directly made. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, instead of NAD, reduced NAD being made, this time you have reduced FAD being made. Now, FAD is similar to that of the NAD. It will do the same job, but it's not as efficient as reduced NAD. But this is what actually happens during the whole process of Krebs cycle. Anyway, on its way back to be converted into oxaloacetic acid again, a next molecule of reduced NAD is made. Okay? Now, class, I want you to bear this in mind. So far, we have lost both of the carbons that we entered Krebs cycle with. So by the end of Krebs cycle, all of the glucose carbon-carbon bonds have been broken. Because, and also please remember, because if you're starting with glucose, you would have had 2 groups of pyruvic acid starting out with, which means there were 2 groups of acetyl coenzyme A, which means that glucose will turn Krebs cycle twice. So all of this process is going to happen 2 times for every glucose molecule we start out with in glycolysis. So these 2 carbons will be lost. So by the end of this cycle, the first time around, 2 carbons will be lost. The second time around, and next 2 carbons will be lost. So if you add them up, this 2 added to the next 2 that will be lost from the second spin of the cycle, that's 4 carbons in total. And remember, during the link reaction, there was a carbon that was lost again per pyruvate, which means now you have all of your 6, because 2 from up here, because this is going to happen twice per glucose molecule, and then 2 from here, that is going to be times 2, because this is going to happen twice. Okay? Sorry for the bad handwriting, but so it goes sometimes. Okay, I hope you are getting this, because it's very crucial that you understand what is going on. Now, before I go any further, I need to talk to you a little bit about the making of the ATP molecule. Now, the direct making of the ATP molecule is just that in the conversion of this compound to this other compound, it's still a 4-carbon compound, so there's no loss of carbons or anything like that. But that conversion is enough to allow for ADP to attach to what's called an inorganic phosphate. That inorganic phosphate is just because of in the matrix of the mitochondria, there are a lot of different ions and stuff floating around in there, and therefore you have ADP attaching to the inorganic phosphate to make ATP. Remember, the T in ATP stands for 3 or tri. So that's why you have D, which is 2, add 1, make 3. Okay, very simple. And so this form of phosphorylation, from photosynthesis we told you already, that phosphorylation is about the addition of phosphate to something. And so in this case, the making of ATP is always called phosphorylation. The making of ATP in photosynthesis was called photophosphorylation. Photosynthesis. The making of ATP in glycolysis, because it's used the same method, is called substrate level phosphorylation. And the making of ATP here in Krebs cycle is also called substrate level phosphorylation. Anytime the ATP is being made directly, that is how we end up with substrate level phosphorylation. The reason I stopped to say this to you is the next step we're going to look at is a different type of phosphorylation that is going to occur. All right? So let us move on to the next slide. Okay, class. Don't want this. Okay. All right. Now, the first step, we went through that already. I know some people don't like just the diagram. They like to see what I just said in words. So here you go. The first step. All right. I'm just going around. This is still showcasing all of Krebs cycle. And Krebs cycle, all what I just said in words. So I hope you're able to see this and recognize what I just said is what happened from the acetyl coenzyme A leaving off the acetyl group to combine with oxaloacetate or oxaloacetic acid to make the 6-carbon citrate. When this happens, the coenzyme A goes to its own way to pick up a next acetyl group, and the cycle continues. At the end of this whole process, Krebs cycle, what happens here is that 3 molecules of the reduced NAD will be made per pyruvate. So clearly, if it's 3 molecules, you'll have to always multiply this by 2 if it's pyruvate, because we are looking at the entire glucose molecule. So the entire glucose molecule would have done this 6 times instead. All right? Each pyruvate will have produced 1 molecule of reduced FAD, 1 molecule of ATP, and 2 molecules of CO2. Okay? So, and recall again, always remember that the 2 pyruvates would have been made from 1 glucose molecule. So the numbers you're seeing above should be doubled for the full tally, which we have here. So by the end of Krebs cycle, you have made all of these NADH and carbon dioxide and FADH. And please note, by then, there's no more carbons from the original glucose molecule to contend with. So now we are going to focus on making more ATP, but this time, we are going to be looking at all of those reduced NAD and reduced FAD that were made in the previous stages. So now we are going to go to the electron transport chain. And it's sometimes called oxidative phosphorylation. Okay? Oxidative phosphorylation, because this chain would not occur if oxygen was not available. All right? And please note, the link reaction, Krebs cycle, all of those would not have happened if it was not for oxygen being present in the cell. All right? Now, this diagram can be a bit intimidating because a lot of students see it and they go, oh, Lord, what is this? So let us try and see if we can demystify it a bit. It's a chain. These circles, these blue circles actually represent the different protein complexes that it will be accepting the hydrogen, the electron, from the reduced NAD, thus oxidizing it eventually. And also, please note that you notice these gray section called the inner membrane here. The gray part represents the double membrane or the lipid bilayer, because you should remember that from Unit 1, that a membrane is made of a lipid bilayer that is going to allow for the transfer of substances, all right, because it's a selectively permeable membrane. Now, what happens at the start of the chain, the reduced NAD will first dissociate the hydrogen from its electrons. Well, not all of its electrons, obviously. An electron, which will be captured by the first molecule in the protein complex, the chain of protein complexes. You don't have to know the names of them. So that's okay, all right, that you don't know. Just to know that just like with photosynthesis, the electrons are going to be transferred from one complex to a next, to a next, to a next, to a next, to reach the end of the chain. While this is happening, the hydrogens that are coming off from the reduced NAD are going to make their way through the membrane to the other side of the membrane. Now, this process is actually a sort of active transport, but this is an active transport that don't use ATP. But, miss, how can that be? I thought we were told that active transport requires ATP. Well, I'm not certain who told you that, but what you should have been taught was that active transport requires energy to move substances from one side of a membrane to the next side of the membrane. And in this case, ATP is not the energy that is being used. What is happening is that as the electrons is transferred from complex to complex to complex along the chain, there is enough energy given off during that transfer to allow for the movement of the hydrogen ions through the membrane to the other side. Okay, it's very important. Now, at the end of the chain, the final acceptor of the electron is going to be oxygen. And also, the hydrogen ions will come into play, and water will be made. So if you remember correctly from the equation of respiration, that at the end of respiration, you have 6 carbon dioxide being made per glucose molecule and 6 molecules of water. Here is where the water is being made. Oxygen is a final electron acceptor, and hydrogen comes along, the hydrogen ions that is, comes along to bind with the oxygen to make water. Then you're going to say, but miss, the hydrogen didn't go across to the other side of the membrane, so how will the hydrogen come from? Yeah, let's get to that. Now what happens is that the hydrogen start to get accumulated in this side of the membrane. And as they get accumulated here, they're now going to have a higher concentration up here than is down here. And you know what happens? They are going to want to come back to the other side, like in diffusion. But because they're charged, they can't just pass through the membrane just like that. So instead, they pass through a particular protein that is found in the membrane known as ATP synthase. And you would have seen that in the previous time when we did photosynthesis. It is the same molecule. As the hydrogen passes through the ATP synthase, it is allowed something to spin in the ATP synthase, which is a protein, it's an enzyme, and allow for the formation of ATP. Because this hydrogen is going to go and bind with the oxygen along with the electrons, it is called, this type of ATP formation is called oxidative phosphorylation, because oxygen is involved in the process somehow. And the process of having the hydrogen coming through the ATP synthase through the membrane is called chemoosmosis. Okay? So I hope you're understanding, and I've drawn this part to show this is outer membrane of the mitochondria. This is the inner membrane space. This is the actual membrane or the cristae, and the matrix in the center. All right? So this is the end of respiration, where at the end of respiration, what you have happening is that the reduced NAD is now being converted through a process so that ATP can be made using ATP synthase. All right? So at the end, 33 ATPs would have been made based on all of the NADH and all of the FAD. Oh, I did not show that to you. It was in the diagram where FAD actually joins the chain later on, not at the start of the chain. So that's the reason FAD is usually accredited for less ATP formation in comparison to the reduced NAD. All right? Well, we have heard of cyanide. We have heard of cyanide. And cyanide is a poison. Everybody knows about cyanide, how cyanide is a poison. Now, how is cyanide poisonous? Here is why. This is a question that comes about the poison ability of cyanide, because cyanide is what's called, it halts aerobic respiration. How does it do it? What happens is, at the end of the electron transport chain, instead of oxygen being the final electron acceptor, cyanide ends up being the final electron acceptor. And if that occurs, it means there's no making of FAD anymore. Oh, sorry, there's no making of the oxidized FAD plus or NAD plus. So what ends up happening is that it halts respiration altogether, because at the end of that chain, the right thing is not there to accept the electron. So cyanide has basically stopped respiration right at the end, and therefore it backs up everything else, including Krebs cycle, because Krebs cycle requires FAD plus and NAD plus for it to make reduced FAD plus, FAD, and reduce NAD. And if they are not available, then Krebs cycle cannot go either. So we have to watch that. Please note that human skeletal muscles cannot respire anaerobically forever and ever. Amen. Okay? Also note that your heart, I have to go through this very quickly, but your heart muscles cannot undergo anaerobic respiration any at all, because anaerobic respiration will cause a muscle to get tired, to get weary. Could you imagine if your heart muscles started to get tired? What a thing that would be. If your heart beating from before you were born, the muscles say, you know what? Because there's no oxygen around, we're going to respire anaerobically. If that was to happen, it would mean then the muscles of the heart will start getting tired. We cannot afford for our muscles in our heart to get tired, because the lactic acid buildup during anaerobic respiration is toxic. You can't afford for toxins to be in your heart. That's one. Two, the body, when the heart gets tired, and when any muscles get tired, eventually it will stop or slow down. We cannot afford that to happen with our muscles in our heart. And so that's the reason, even though you may have heard that anaerobic respiration can take place in humans, it only takes place in the skeletal muscles, your leg muscles, the muscles in your arm, and so on. They can afford to get tired, because when you get tired, you sit down, you cool out, and you rest. Okay? We know that when we get tired after a long bout of exercise, one of the things that happen is that fatigue brings some pain to the muscles. And those sore muscles will make you not want to move again, not want to do that exercise, even though you should, like myself. But guess what? If your heart muscles were like that, then we'd have a problem, because your heart can't afford to be in pain while it's doing its job. So because the heart has to be constantly working, even when you are sleeping. You understand? And so because of that, anaerobic respiration will cause fatigue, as we told you before. The heart cannot afford to get tired. And so therefore you find anaerobic respiration cannot take place in your heart muscles. And next place anaerobic respiration doesn't really take place is in your brain. Okay? Because your brain cells cannot afford to stop working at any time because it's tired. because you need your brain even while you are sleeping. Okay? So I hope we have done a good job so far with telling you about respiration. If you have more questions, and I am going to post this in the Google Classroom. I know I didn't post one last week. It's because it's a continuation of this one. So therefore, I'll post this whole thing so you have access to it, because I know there's quite a number of people that is already there and who are waiting for it and have been asking for it. So I'll do that for you, okay? So the main points of this lesson for you to remember, class, is this. Respiration is the key way of cells getting energy. This starts out from releasing that energy from organic food, such as carbohydrates. All right? And there are two types, anaerobic and aerobic respiration. Okay? So thank you all. We have come to the end of another lesson. I hope that you have learned a lot, that everything was clear. But if not, please send any questions to Television Jamaica's Facebook page at Television Jamaica, or Instagram at Television_Jamaica, or use the hashtag TVJClassTime. And make sure to join us again tomorrow for more CSEC and CAPE classes. Until then, stay safe.